The most confusing pain is not always the pain you cannot explain. Sometimes it is the pain you understand completely and still cannot escape. You know what happened. You understand why it hurt. You can see what it revealed. Looking back, you even know what you should have seen sooner. You may understand why the other person acted the way they did. And yet, it still hurts. That is the part that makes you question yourself, because somewhere inside, you believed understanding would be enough. You assumed that once you could explain the pain, it would lose its power. That insight would become closure. That once you could name the pattern, your body would finally stop reacting to it. But then something ordinary brings it all back. A place you never expected to matter. A date on the calendar. A passing comment from someone who has no idea what it touches. A song playing quietly in the background. Or simply an ordinary evening when nothing is wrong, but something inside you remembers. And suddenly, the question is no longer, why did this hurt me? You already know the answer. The question becomes, why does it still hurt, even though I understand it? That question can quietly turn into shame, because you start telling yourself, maybe I have not healed. Maybe I am still stuck. Maybe I am weaker than I thought. Maybe I should be over this by now. But some pain does not disappear simply because you finally understand where it came from. Because some pain is more than a feeling. It changes how you see yourself, how easily you trust, how you imagine the future, how safe the world feels after something has happened. And when pain reaches that deeply, it cannot always be solved like an ordinary problem. It has to be integrated. It has to be carried differently. Not because you are supposed to suffer forever, not because pain is somehow noble, and not because everything happens for a reason, but because some experiences change you long before you know how to live with what they changed. And the work is not always to erase the pain. Sometimes the work is making sure the pain no longer gets to organize the rest of your life. There is the pain itself, and then there is the pressure to be over it. The second kind of pain is quieter, but it can become even heavier, because now you are no longer dealing only with what happened. You are also carrying the weight of believing you should not still be affected by it. You tell yourself, I should be past this by now. I have already talked about it. I have already cried over it. I already understand why it happened. So why is it still here? Little by little, the pain stops feeling like pain. It starts feeling like evidence. Evidence that you have not healed enough, not matured enough, not become strong enough. Evidence that some part of you is still quietly stuck. And because that feels difficult to admit, you begin performing recovery. You tell people you are fine before you truly are. You stop bringing it up because you do not want to sound dramatic. You learn to look calm so no one sees how much effort it still takes just to stay steady. But healing is not a performance. It is not a final exam where success means never feeling pain again. Sometimes the pressure to be over it turns healing itself into another place where you abandon yourself. Every painful reaction becomes something to hide. Every difficult day becomes evidence against you. Every returning memory feels like another failure. But pain returning does not always mean you have gone backward. Sometimes it simply means something inside you is still trying to find a place for what happened. Not because you are weak, but because some experiences do more than hurt your feelings. They change the way you understand yourself, the way you see other people, the way you move through life. And pain that reaches that deeply needs more than explanation. It needs integration. Some pain is a problem to solve. If you are in danger, you need safety. If someone keeps hurting you, you may need distance. If your body needs care, you may need medical treatment. And when life becomes unstable, what helps may be therapy, support, rest, community, financial stability, or a real change in your circumstances. So this is not an argument for simply carrying every kind of pain. Some pain calls for action. Some pain calls for protection. Some pain calls for real help. But there is another kind of pain, the kind that remains even after the practical problem has been resolved. The relationship is over, yet something inside you still does not trust your own judgment. You have left the job, but you still do not know who you are without that role. The betrayal has ended, but part of you still wonders whether love is safe. The failure belongs to the past, yet some part of you still treats it as evidence of your worth. That kind of pain is not only about what happened, it is about what the experience changed, because it changed the story you were living inside. Psychologists who study meaning-making have found that difficult experiences can shake the deeper beliefs people rely on to make sense of their lives. Questions like, what can I trust? What kind of person am I? Is the world safe? Does effort really matter? Will people stay? Can I make a better choice next time? Once pain reaches those questions, it can no longer be treated like a simple problem to solve. Because the real question is no longer, how do I get rid of this feeling? It becomes, how do I live now, after this has changed the way I see myself, other people, and the future? That is why some pain remains long after you understand it. You may understand exactly what happened, but you are still learning how to live in the world that experience left behind. When something hurts, the most natural reaction is to want it gone. No one wants old memories to keep finding their way back. No one wants to be changed by something they never chose. So you start looking for a way to fix it. You read, you think, you journal. You replay every detail, hoping something will finally make sense. You search for the lesson. You try to forgive before forgiveness feels honest. You look for closure from someone who may never be able to give it. And slowly, you begin chasing a version of yourself that can no longer be affected. Some of those things can help. Understanding can help. Reflection can help. Therapy can help. Learning to recognize patterns can help. But there comes a point where healing quietly turns into a project of control. The question is no longer, how do I care for this pain? It becomes, how do I make sure this never touches me again? That is where many people become stuck, because now the pain is still at the center. Even healing begins revolving around it. You make decisions to avoid feeling it. You protect relationships by avoiding the possibility of being hurt the same way. You start shaping your future around the hope that nothing like this will ever happen again. Acceptance and commitment therapy, often called ACT, offers a helpful idea: psychological flexibility. In simple terms, it means you do not have to wait for every painful feeling to disappear before you begin living according to what matters most. You can notice the pain, you can stop fighting the fact that it is there, and you can still choose a direction that is not defined by it. Because the attempt to erase pain completely can become another way of living under its control. If your whole life is organized around never feeling that pain again, then the pain is still making the decisions. It is still shaping where you go, who you trust, what you avoid, and how much of yourself you allow to stay alive. So the problem is not that you want to heal. The problem begins when healing becomes another demand to become untouched. Some pain does not need you to think harder. It needs you to stop treating your own humanity as something that has to be fixed. The word acceptance can feel deeply uncomfortable when something has truly hurt you. It can sound like giving up, like pretending it did not matter, or letting someone escape responsibility. But that is not what acceptance means. Acceptance is not approval. It is not saying the pain was deserved. It is not saying the other person was right. It is not saying the loss was fair. And it certainly does not mean remaining in a situation that continues to harm you. Acceptance begins when you stop fighting the fact that something happened, not because it was okay, but because reality does not become less real when you refuse to face it. The only thing that changes is that you stay trapped, arguing with a past that can no longer answer you. There is an important difference between saying, "This should never have happened," and saying, "It happened. Now I have to decide how I want to live with the fact that it did." The first sentence may be completely true. Maybe it should never have happened. Maybe you deserved better. Maybe someone failed you. Maybe life was profoundly unfair. But the second sentence is where movement begins, because reality does not become easier to live with by refusing to touch it. It only becomes harder to respond to. Acceptance does not erase grief. It does not silence anger. It does not remove accountability. And it does not mean you stop needing support. What it changes is something else. You stop waiting for the past to become different before giving yourself permission to make a choice in the present. Sometimes that is the first way pain begins to be carried differently. Not because you have learned to like it, not because you have turned it into something beautiful, but because you are no longer spending your whole life trying to prove that it should not have happened. One of the hardest things people do after being hurt is rush to find meaning. Almost immediately, the questions begin. What did this teach you? How did it make you stronger? What was the reason? What was the lesson? Sometimes those questions come from kindness. People want suffering to make sense. They want to believe that pain can eventually become something useful. But when meaning is forced too soon, it becomes another weight to carry. Now you are not only hurting, you are also expected to turn that hurt into wisdom. You do not owe anyone that. You do not have to feel grateful for what hurt you. You do not have to call it a blessing. And you do not have to force a beautiful lesson out of an experience that changed you before you were ready. Viktor Frankl is often reduced to a single idea: find meaning in suffering. But that misses what makes his work valuable. He was not saying that suffering is good, or that pain is noble, or that every wound arrives with a hidden lesson. A more honest way to understand his idea might be this: when something cannot be undone, the question is no longer, "Why did this happen?" It becomes, "How do I respond without letting this take everything from me?" Meaning is rarely one great revelation. More often, it begins quietly. It begins the moment you decide, "I will not let this pain make me cruel. I will not let this loss make me numb. I will not let this betrayal keep me from recognizing people who deserve my trust. I will not let this failure decide what I am willing to try again." That is not forced positivity, and it is not pretending the pain was somehow good. It is choosing what the pain does not get to take from you. Meaning cannot be demanded from suffering, but over time, you may begin to build a life where pain is no longer only a wound. It becomes something you have learned to live alongside, honestly, carefully, without pretending it was ever beautiful. Carrying pain differently does not always mean it becomes lighter. Sometimes it simply means it no longer sits in the same place. At first, pain can move to the center of your life. It becomes the lens through which everything else is seen. Your decisions begin to revolve around it. Your trust begins to revolve around it. Even the future starts looking different because of it. If you were abandoned, every delayed reply can start feeling like a warning. If you failed, every new opportunity can begin to look like another chance to be humiliated. If someone betrayed you, closeness itself can start to feel dangerous. And after a deep loss, it can seem as though the future has quietly closed without telling you. The pain is no longer just something you remember. It has become the thing that leads. Little by little, your life grows smaller, all in the name of staying safe. Carrying pain differently begins with noticing where that is happening. Not with shame, with honesty. You begin asking, where has my life grown smaller around this pain? What am I avoiding that still matters to me? Where have I allowed one experience to become the final story about my future? Resilience is often mistaken for hardness, as though the strongest people are the ones who feel the least. But real resilience looks much more like flexibility, the ability to bend without breaking who you are, to adapt without losing yourself, to stay connected to life even after life has hurt you. That is why carrying pain differently does not mean pretending it never happened. The pain may still return, but it is no longer the only voice making your decisions. From the outside, that change may look almost invisible. You answer a message you would once have ignored. You tell the truth instead of disappearing. You try again, this time with a little more wisdom and a little less fear. You allow yourself to care again, while seeing people more clearly. You ask for help without letting the pain become your whole identity. The pain has not disappeared, but your life is no longer organized around protecting it. That is what it means to carry it differently. The hardest part is that life rarely waits until you feel completely ready. You may still be grieving, still rebuilding, still uncertain, still more sensitive than you used to be, still carrying changes you never asked for. And yet, life keeps asking for your participation. Not all at once, not perfectly, not as though nothing ever happened. Just one moment, one choice, one step at a time. That is where your values become important, because pain usually tells you what to avoid. Your values remind you what is still worth moving toward. Pain whispers, never trust again. Your values answer, move carefully, but do not close yourself to the possibility of real connection. Pain says, do not try, you already failed. Your values answer, try again, more carefully, more honestly, with support if you need it. But do not let one failure become the edge of your whole life. Pain almost always tries to make life smaller, because smaller feels safer. But your values remind you that safety alone is not enough to build a meaningful life. None of this means forcing yourself forward before you are ready, or pretending your limits do not exist. It simply means asking better questions. Instead of asking, how do I make sure this never hurts again? You begin asking, what is this pain teaching me to avoid? Where has my life grown smaller around it? What kind of support would help me carry this without disappearing into it? Who do I still want to be while this pain is part of my life? You do not have to wait for every trace of pain to disappear before your life is allowed to move again. Sometimes living is not what happens after healing. Sometimes living is part of how healing happens. You make one honest choice, then another. You stop asking pain for permission to move forward. You stop measuring healing by whether nothing ever hurts anymore. And little by little, the pain becomes one part of your life instead of the force that organizes it. Some pain may never disappear completely, or it may change in ways you cannot control, slowly, unevenly, with seasons when it feels far away and others when it quietly returns. That does not always mean you are back where you started. Sometimes it simply means something mattered, something changed you, and healing is rarely as neat as people imagine. The goal is not to become untouchable, because someone who can no longer be hurt is not always healed. Sometimes they have simply learned to stay defended. But the goal is not to turn every painful experience into a beautiful story either. Some things were never beautiful. Some things were deeply unfair. Some things should never have happened. You do not owe them a comforting meaning. What you can do is learn how to keep living after them, to notice the pain without obeying everything it asks of you, to remember without letting memory become a prison, to protect yourself without closing every remaining door, to be changed without letting one chapter become your entire identity. Maybe healing does not always mean the pain disappears. Maybe it means your life slowly becomes larger than the pain. A life can still hold grief, memory, caution, and still make room for work, for rest, for friendship, for love, for the possibility of beginning again. Some pain cannot be solved like a problem, but it can be carried differently, not as the center of your life, not as proof of who you are, not as the final word about your future, only as one chapter in a much larger story, a chapter that mattered, a chapter that changed you, but not the one that gets the final word.